Welcome, Uri. I believe you don't need much introduction. Uri is the co-founder of Belvo along with Pablo Vigueira, and the idea is that we will have a series of interviews with him to dive deeper into what's happening into the open finance ecosystem. While cash remains king in many parts of Latin America, digital payments are not only increasing in penetration, but also into diversification. In countries like Brazil, account to account payments, which users can make directly from their bank accounts, have already surpassed credit cards as a method of payment in digital commerce. This is going to be the topic of our call today. Let's start. So, Uri, what would you say are the benefits of account to account payments versus existing payments methods in the markets you operate in?
Thanks. Maybe we can start with a very quick overview of the account-to-account payments landscape. I think this has been a topic that has been extremely promising probably since 2015, where many different countries have started adopting account-to-account payment methods. When you look at the problems around processing payments with traditional payment rails, there are a couple that are normally the ones that suggest using account-to-account rails as the potential solution. The first one is processing payments in general is very expensive, and companies are looking to alternative rails to lower their costs. That's probably how we've seen account-to-account payments in the US, for example, with the use of ACH, kind of explode over the last years. I mean, ACH is not the best user-friendly payment method, but because of the high cost processing payments with credit and debit cards, it has been chosen by many companies as their solution in order to be profitable. So reducing cost is probably number one objective of companies trying to use account-to-account rails. On the other hand, there are other regions where cost is not such a problem. And then thinking about Europe, where interchange fees on card transactions are controlled by regulator and they're capped, really reducing cost is not an objective of these companies because they are already pretty low. So what we're seeing is actually using account to account for other purposes, which is normally reducing chargeback and fraud. That's why we have seen account to account payment methods start to be implemented in high chargeback, high fraud risk type of businesses, such as electronic gaming, betting, etc. So objective number one can be reducing cost. Objective number two can be actually decreasing fraud and chargeback. What's very interesting is that in Latin America we have both. So processing payments with cards is expensive, and fraud and chargeback rates are particularly high. So that's why account-to-account payments make a lot of sense in Latin America. And you can actually benefit from both things. So reducing costs and increasing adoption or reducing risk. So these are the two main benefits, and this is actually why we have seen solutions like Pix in Brazil, Pay in Mexico, or PSC in Colombia be so successful and so well adopted in the last years.
And how are the different markets approaching the implementation of account-to-account payments across their specific payment rails? What are the available rails that each country has regarding A2A payments, and how do they connect to the rails?
So today at Belvo, we provide solutions on payments both in Mexico and in Brazil. So I'm going to focus a bit on these two countries. What are the account-to-account rails that each one of these countries has? So if we start with Brazil, everyone talks about Pix, right? So there are different account-to-account rails. So there are traditional transactions, so the TED, TOC, etc. But the most widely used account-to-account payment method today is Pix. Pix allows you to process payments quasi-instantly, extremely cheaply, and with high level of security. Why? Because payments are always initiated from your bank account. So you have to log into your bank account either via app or via web in order to be able to process a Pix payment. That authentication process provides a lot of certainty to merchants to know that the person who is behind that payment is actually the owner of the account. That has been phenomenal for Brazil. And I mean, it's probably an example that for many countries in the world to see how the adoption of that account-to-account rail has happened in the last year. There are other payment methods, but they have a lot less popularity in Brazil. In Mexico, we have similar solutions. Maybe they're implemented a bit differently. The most common payment method that allows for account-to-account payments to be instant and be pretty cheap is called SPAY. SPAY is, in some shape or form, we could understand it as being similar to PIX. It has different technical implementations, but essentially does exactly the same thing. It allows you to push one payment, to send money to one account in an instant way from your bank account. So it has very similar levels of security because you have to authenticate within your bank. And it allows money to be sent instantly and also in a very cheap way. In Mexico, on the other hand, there's also somehow high adoption of another payment method, which is called domiciliación, essentially direct debit, what somebody called ACH in the US. While this is also available in Brazil, it's less common as it has quite a lot of complexities in order to scale the payment method. But in Mexico, it's more or less used. It allows you to actually, instead of pushing payments to one account, it allows you to pull payments from your clients' accounts. It has a lot of benefits because it can allow you to process payments in a recurring basis, variable payments, but it's also a product that you really need to understand well and that is not properly served by banks, which is precisely what we want to change at Belvo. So these are, in a nutshell, different rails that today are being used in Latin America.
And looking specifically at Brazil, how can the PIX experience serve as an example for other countries?
That's a great question. I think the most important point or the most important successful factor in PIC's success has been the push from the regulator. I think the regulator has had a very clear agenda, has set very clear terms, deadlines, and obligations for financial institutions to implement these payment rails. The consequence has been that banks have been ready for these payment methods. And then on top of that, the central bank is not only stopping with basic PICs. So, PICs allows for this one-time payment, but on top of that, so the central bank is creating a lot of technology and a lot of new features that are going to allow PICs to be used even more widely. So today we are saying, as we mentioned at the beginning, PICs has surpassed credit and debit cards in terms of a number of payments, but they haven't reached all their potential. There are still a lot of use cases that still cannot be tackled by PICs, and the central bank knows about it, and they are acting. So to me, the most important lesson learned is how clear the agenda of the regulator has been, setting objectives, setting requirements, and setting deadlines for institutions to adopt all the requirements.
What are some of the challenges, tech or other, the A2A model still has to beat in order to grow in adoption and become even more competitive against other more established methods?
So today, when you look at the possibilities that you can accomplish with account-to-account payments, basically you can do one-time payments in a very efficient way with pretty decent user experience. One thing that can be improved is the user experience of the user. When you are processing a payment, it can be a bit more integrated within the flows. However, it's not a huge problem for end users. It's not a huge problem for businesses to receive payments in PIX or using SPAY. So improving the user experience is possible. It can add value, but it's maybe limited. What we've seen in the market is that there is one thing that these account-to-account payment methods cannot support today, and it's very much needed, which is recurrent payments. Today, you cannot pay your Netflix account using PIX. Today, you cannot pay your Spotify account using SPAY. So how do we build recurrent payments using account-to-account rails? Today, any type of recurrent payment has two solutions. Either you use the credit or debit card rail, which is going to be expensive. You're subject to fraud and chargebacks, high decline rates. So it's very inefficient. Or you're going to have to ask your user to pay you every single time. So what we see is that the collection teams in Latin America of companies that need to process payments on a recurring basis is gigantic. There is a big expense incurred into processing payments or receiving payments from these companies. It's a very big problem for them, and they are desperate looking for a solution. We have been analyzing this market for the last 3 years. We have been proposing solutions on improving user experiences. We have been proposing solutions using variable recurrent payments. And this last one is the one that is most limited in the market. And that kind of also shaped our internal vision at Belvo. I mean, Belvo, we are generating a variable recurrent payments account-to-account platform that allows these companies that they suffer a lot to use the existing rails to process payments, not only on a single basis, but on a recurrent basis.
Why do you believe these methods are becoming increasingly popular?
It's to me, it's all about cost and user experience. That's what is going to move the needle for the companies that are going to be implementing these payment methods. If you manage to improve the user experience of people paying, you're going to improve conversion. And if you improve conversion, you're going to improve revenue for your merchants. They're going to like it and they're going to adopt your solution. So if you're a payment service provider, you're really looking into increasing or improving the user experience so that your merchants are more successful. And the second one is cost. Like, I mean, account-to-account payment rails in Latin America, they're extremely cheap. You cannot compete against that. And when you look at the numbers, migrating card payments to Pix or to Spay, it provides quite a lot more margin to this company. So it is, to me, it's as simple as this. I mean, it's improving user experience and reducing cost. If you manage to achieve both goals within regions where costs are high, that's going to be a game changer. And maybe the third reason, which we also commented before, is the reduction in fraud. That is a big problem in Latin America. And if you can guarantee that a payment that is confirmed is never going to be returned, and that you have the highest chances to receive that payment, or even it is confirmed that you're going to receive that payment, that is fantastic. There are other reasons why one could say that account-to-account are becoming more popular. I mean, there are things like, for example, instant settlement that allow companies to benefit from the cash flow effects that this has on their businesses, right? So it's not the same receiving a payment today versus receiving payment at the end of the month. This can be significant for some businesses, but we are not seeing that time to cash is actually the most important factor when merchants adopt different payment methods.
And what are some of the most interesting emerging use cases for A2A payments? And do you have any examples of companies adopting them?
Yeah, and I think these I mean, there's some use cases that to me are pretty fascinating because we're able to do things that before we couldn't. Referring to maybe similar problems as we were talking before, account-to-account payments have not been able to serve recurring use cases, and to me, that is where I mean, we're seeing more interest from the market, and that's where we're seeing kind of big changes in user experiences thanks to that. To me, for example, I don't know, utility companies such as, I mean, we can be talking about Movistar, AT&T in Mexico. They are adopting these type of payment methods where instead of having big collection teams having to ensure the payments are processed, that users are paying, can automate a lot of these processes in themselves by using this type of rails. To me, that's one use case that is very interesting. A second one is we've seen a lot of growth of digital wallets, digital banks in Latin America, one very popular use case is the access to credit cards to a lot of people who were not able to get them. One of the main problems on credit cards is the repayment of the card. Is if you have to proactively pay that card, it's a problem, and people need to remind you. So it has a pretty high risk. Interestingly enough, which in a way makes sense, but in Mexico, you cannot repay your credit card with another credit card, which kind of makes sense. So you are left to payments that are only one-time payments. And that means that collection still is even a bigger problem. So we have seen quite a lot of interest on repayment of credit cards in an automated way in these countries, and we think that this has also a lot of potential. We're working companies like Story in Mexico, where they are adopting this payment method exactly for that reason.
And how do you see A2A payments evolving in the next years, and what impact will this have on the global financial ecosystem?
I think the potential is gigantic. I think the things that can be done with account to account are a lot more efficient than things that we're doing today. And if you ask yourself, if you have the current technology capabilities that we have today, and you live in an era where all transactionality happens in cash, would you build the debit card, or would you build the card network? Probably not, right? So the card network, it has served the industry really well. It still has a lot of value, and I don't think that we are going to replace card payments with account to account completely. But the reality is that there are many use cases that cards have served that probably don't require a card to be generated and all the complexity that that rail contains, with all the players that are involved, etc., etc. I think there's a long journey that account-to-account payments needs to go through in order to tap on use cases that today are still hard. I'm thinking about, for example, international transfers. Like, you cannot pay with PIX in Colombia or in Mexico or in the US, right? So how do we enable account-to-account payments internationally? I think it's a very interesting question, and how we're going to see big companies kind of addressing that problem, and it's going to be fascinating. How do I see the next years? To me, I think going into how to process international payments is going to be a very, very interesting move, and I have no doubts that this is going to happen, because in the end, these rails are inherently more efficient than the existing ones, and step by step we can get more market share with these rails.
Thank you so much, Uri. I'll see you next time.
Thanks a lot.